You're looking at one of the most influential people of the entire 20th century. This is the man who set out to save a superpower, but instead he ended up watching it completely disappear. This is the story of Mikhail Gorbachev.
So here's the big question we're going to tackle. How did one man's plan to fix the Soviet Union actually lead to it breaking apart and literally redrawing the world map? Let's dive in. Okay, to really understand the guy who turned the world upside down, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. We're talking about his incredible journey from a simple farm all the way to the absolute peak of Soviet power. Mikhail Gorbachev's story doesn't start in some fancy palace. Nope, it starts on a farm. He was born in 1931 and spent his teenage years driving a combine harvester. But he was also incredibly smart, and his amazing grades got him into the best law school in Moscow. From there, his ambition and energy just propelled him up the ladder of the Communist Party. He went from being a regional boss in the 70s to joining the most powerful committee in the entire country by 1980.
He joined something called the Politburo. So what even was that? Well, think of it as the ultimate control room for the entire Soviet Union. It was this tiny group of top officials who made every single important decision. Getting a seat at that table meant you were one of the most powerful people in a country of nearly 300 million. But when Gorbachev finally got the top job 5 years later, he wasn't taking over some perfect, well-oiled machine. Not at all. He was inheriting a superpower that was actually teetering on the edge of collapse. In 1985, he took charge. He was 54 years old. Now, that might not sound super young, but compared to the old, frail leaders who came before him, he was a massive jolt of fresh energy. For the first time in a long time, the Soviet people had a leader who seemed young, dynamic, and, get this, actually talked about the country's problems out loud. And what were those problems? Whoa, they were huge. The economy was a total mess. You'd go into stores and find the shelves completely empty. The country was falling way, way behind the rest of the world in technology. The government was unbelievably secretive. It controlled everything people saw, heard, and said. And to top it all off, they were pouring insane amounts of money into their military and thousands of nuclear weapons. Gorbachev took one look at all this and knew that just patching things up wasn't going to cut it. He had to do something radical. He came up with two huge, game-changing ideas that he hoped would rebuild the whole system. His big solution was a two-part punch. First, you had glasnost, which means openness. For a government that was all about secrets, he introduced freedom of speech. People could finally criticize their leaders and talk about real issues without being afraid. Then came perestroika, or restructuring. To fix that broken economy, he started allowing some small, private businesses and let factories make more of their own decisions. The hope was to kickstart things. But his revolution wasn't just for inside the Soviet Union. Gorbachev also set his sights on the rest of the world, and he made moves that would turn him into a global hero. Okay, quick history lesson. For over 40 years, the world had been stuck in something called the Cold War. It was this super tense standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. They never fought each other directly, but they built up these terrifying arsenals of nuclear weapons, enough to destroy the entire planet many times over. It was a scary time. Gorbachev decided this madness had to end. He started meeting with the US President, Ronald Reagan, and in 1987, they did something that was absolutely unthinkable at the time. They signed a treaty not just to limit their nuclear weapons, but to actually destroy an entire category of them. It was a massive step away from the brink of nuclear war. Then came 1989, the year that changed everything. All across Eastern Europe, which was controlled by the Soviet Union, people started demanding freedom. And when the Berlin Wall, the biggest symbol of the Cold War, started getting torn down by ordinary people, the whole world watched to see what Gorbachev would do. In the past, the Soviets would have sent in the tanks, but he made a different choice. He let it happen. He let freedom win. For all of this, the world celebrated him as a great peacemaker. He even won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1990. But here's the crazy irony. While the rest of the world was giving him awards, things back in his own country were starting to spin out of control. You see, Gorbachev had opened the floodgates of change, but now he couldn't control the flood. The very policies he created to save the Soviet Union were actually starting to tear it apart. And the end came shockingly fast. It started with the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986, which exposed just how secretive and broken the system was.
Then, in August 1991, a group of old-school communist leaders who hated his reforms tried to overthrow him in a coup. And just a few months later, on Christmas Day in 1991, Gorbachev resigned and the Soviet Union officially ceased to exist. That coup attempt was such a dramatic moment. These hardliners basically put Gorbachev under house arrest and announced on TV that they were in charge. But they completely misjudged the situation. Thousands of ordinary people poured into the streets to defend the new freedoms they had just gotten. The coup fell apart in 3 days. But even though it failed, Gorbachev's power was shattered. So, in the end, the Soviet Union, this huge empire made up of many different republics, just dissolved. And in its place, 15 new independent countries popped up on the map. Places like Ukraine, Georgia, and Kazakhstan. The superpower was gone. So after all that, how are we supposed to remember Mikhail Gorbachev? Well, this is where it gets really complicated, because depending on where you're from, you get two totally different answers. To most of the world, he's a giant, a hero, the Nobel Prize winner who ended the Cold War without a major war and gave freedom to millions. But for a lot of people in his own country who lived through that time, he's the guy they blame for the economic chaos, the food shortages, and for losing their status as a global superpower. This quote really hits the nail on the head. He wanted to be a reformer. He wanted to fix the system he believed in. But the changes he set in motion didn't just reform it. They caused it to completely vanish. Mikhail Gorbachev lived a very long life, passing away in 2022 at the age of 91. He left behind a world that he had completely and fundamentally reshaped in just a few short, incredible years. Which brings us right back to our big question. Was Mikhail Gorbachev a hero who brought freedom to millions and pulled the world back from the edge of nuclear war? Or was his story a tragedy of a well-intentioned leader who lost control and accidentally destroyed his own country? The truth is, people are still arguing about that today.